think we got Daniel Zeichner. I just would like to tell everybody that the other MPs were invited, but unfortunately they have very busy lives and couldn't attend, but I'm very grateful for Daniel agreeing to come and give his view on what's happening in Westminster. Welcome, Daniel.
Well, thank you very much, Katie, and thank you to everybody else also for being involved in this. Sorry I wasn't able to join you earlier and hear some of the points. I came in just as Sam was saying, everything always seems to be somebody else's fault. And I think those are almost the exact words I used in the debate this week on the building safety bill. I know there are people on this call who are more expert on the detail on this than I am. But what I would say is that I've had so many representations, particularly from people in Trumpington over the last few years, but not just Trumpington. And it's not just about the fire safety issues. This is a rottenness, I'm afraid, which seems to have seeped into the entire development sector. And I was in Trumpington a couple of weeks ago looking at stuff that had been left unfinished, the skate park, all the kind of stuff which I suspect you've already talked about and already know about. And the bit I particularly picked up in the debate on Wednesday, and I'm sure you'll all be aware that there was the second reading of the fire safety bill from the government on Wednesday, was a point that the LGA made about building control. I was a councillor many years ago, sat on planning committees like a number of you do, and I suppose I've watched with dismay over the years as what I thought actually was quite a good system in the past. Always been problems, of course, local authorities always under-resourced, I get all that. But to end up with a situation where effectively all of that has been outsourced and appears to be controlled by the same sort of side of the sector as the people doing the building was always going to be a recipe for failure, it seemed to me. And sadly, the proposals that are before us in Parliament at the moment, there are some improvements, and certainly it was done in a rather odd way, I have to say. There was a ministerial statement alongside the debate, which seemed to suggest that the EWS1 forms for less than 18 metres are now going to be not needed, although quite how that's going to work in terms of the insurance companies and the mortgage lenders still remains to be seen. But if that is what happens, I think we'll all be much relieved. But going back to the building control point, I just despair when we've got a system like that. NHBC, in my experience, has been useless when I've been pursuing constituents' complaints, not just Trumpington. I was probably on safer naming developers in the House of Commons I am outside, but you'll all know who some of these developers are. So I've seen some dreadful examples in other parts of the city too. £1 million plus homes literally taken apart and having to be rebuilt. And when you look at some of the stuff that was revealed, things, literally joists not connected, pipes not connected, often beautiful homes in terms of the design, but appalling practice. Now, I think we know why some of that happened. It was during the building boom, endless outsourcing, people under pressure, which I understand, I get that, but we just cannot allow that to go on. Of course, we've now ended up in this awful situation where so many people are stuck, can't sell, can't move. And I've had, there's a number of people on this call who have been on calls that I've organised over the last year or two. In the end, it is going to need intervention from government, and councils can try really hard, but it's going to need government to sort this out. So I'm hoping, Katie, that because there is cross-party anger on this. I mean, Labour's obviously furious, and Lucy Powell, who leads for us on housing, has come up with, I think, some quite good proposals based on experience in Australia, where this is not just in the UK where we've had these problems, where in effect you set up a task force which really takes it on almost state by state, building by building, and sorts it out. So that's our proposal. I'm sure there'll be people who will be able to pick holes in that as well. But I think there was widespread feeling across the House on Wednesday that this latest iteration still isn't enough. It's a step forward, but it still isn't going to solve the problem in many ways. Possibly looking forward, the new Homes Ombudsman, I mean, I've been calling for that in debates for years now. This has been going on running and running and running. That may help, but I don't think it's going to do anything for people who've got the problems now. And that, I think, is one of the difficulties. And there is, in the end, a big question to be answered here: is who pays for all this? because it's a big bill. I mean, some people talk about as much as 15 billion. And I don't think it should fall on leaseholders. I don't think it should fall on those who are innocent in this. But equally, there's a big question to me as to whether it should fall on the wider taxpayer when there are many other calls on taxpayers' money. The people who really should be paying this are the people who made the profits in the first place. Of course, a lot of them have gone, up and gone. And in fact, I have got to make this point. I generally use the Sunday Times to give me a little bit of distance. It's the Sunday Times who've been pointing out the unhealthily close relationship between the governing party and the development industry and the political donations that are associated. So this is a really, I mean, I described it in the House on Wednesday as, you know, we used to think other countries had corruption problems. To me, this is a corrupt, broken system. Trying to undo it is going to be really hard, but we need to, because so many innocent people have been caught through absolutely no fault of their own. And we've got to make sure that we don't repeat these mistakes in future. So MPs are working on it, but in the end, it will be down to the government because they've got the majority and they will determine the outcome of this at the moment. Rebellions against the government tend to fizzle out. When you've got a majority of 80, you may be able to get 20, 30 people, hard to get all the way, but we'll do our best. But I think what local people can do is keep giving people like me the examples, and I'm grateful to people. People don't always want to have their personal stories highlighted, and I quite understand that. But where people can, it really does help, because it brings these what are sometimes quite dry issues very much to life. So those are my slightly unconnected reflections, Katie, because I'm not entirely sure how the discussion's been structured so far, but very happy to hear people's observations and comments. And as I said in the comments, I'm just so furious about all this because I can see the harm that it's caused.
Have we just lost Katie?
I think we might have just lost Katie.
I think Heather Williams is now the host.
Right. Well, in which case, I can either continue busking it until Katie returns, or I can hand over to someone else.
She's back.
She's back. Hello, Katie. You're back. You're muted, though.
Can't hear you.
We've got such a great group here. You can continue without me.
But back to you, Katie.
So I would like to thank you very much. I wondered, would any of the councillors like to come in and make comments or ask questions? No. Tumi, would you like to say anything?
I was just unmuting. Thank you, Daniel, for your reflections. I mean, having heard the stories told by the personal stories told by those who've been able to share with us, I do feel for them. I have endured some of that before, but I'm also very aware of John Gaskell's case. And I mean, he and I had communicated on this issue before, especially because a housing association was involved. And I hear him regarding, you know, the quality of the bill, but it's not right, I don't think, to say that because a council has a relationship with a housing association that we endorse everything that they do. They're a separate organization. We, you know, our powers of what we can or cannot do in relation to, you know, the houses that they build is limited. And I've been sitting here racking my brain as to what else councils can do to help. But bearing in mind, the building control industry has been deregulated. But we have an award-winning building control service, right? A joint service here. And they're great. But when you have developers who go elsewhere, it's difficult to then control that. So in my view, I think we need to sort of perhaps revisit this issue of who signs off, you know, new build houses. There's got to be some control. And Daniel, I mean, that will be my request to you, in that we can't control the quality of the build unless the build is for us as a council. And yes, you know, we do instruct builders to build for us. We can't control what goes into the market. So it will have to be legislation that comes in to enable us have those powers. We need powers to be able to enforce it. We have been hammered on the numbers that we deliver. It's only now that this government is going to talk about quality, about, you know, building beautiful, or whatever they call it. But the quality of what we deliver also is important. So I will leave that with you and say, please, you know, we need the powers to be able to deal effectively with developers.
Thank you, Tumi. I think maybe Heather, would you like to come in now?
Thank you. My hand didn't get forgotten this time, Katie. Thank you. So I think my sort of reflections and one question perhaps is that much like we were talking this morning, I think it is, we are in the afternoon now, about the importance of the blame culture not taking over, and the importance of everybody working together and being as cross-party as possible, I think really needs to move through with this, as well as the other issues that we've spoken about. And when it comes to housing associations, I do have mixed experience, and I'm sure other councillors have as well, that some housing associations I could not say have put a foot wrong, very effective, you know, do things straight away. And then we have others that are very problematic. So I think there are patterns of behaviour and issues that we can recognise, and as a council, you know, we do have a responsibility to distance ourselves and not have a working relationship if we are aware of housing associations that are not helping their residents. When it comes to other things, and I've got a slight question for Daniel, if I may, Katie, in that what I was saying earlier, I completely agreed with you about the price not being really required. The people that live in these buildings that need refurbishment completely should not be the ones that have to foot the bill, 100%. But I do sympathise as well with what you're saying is that you know, the taxpayer. I think the government should step in for the short term, but ultimately it should be seeking to claw back from those people, which I think is what you were sort of referring to. But you know Westminster more than us. We've spoken about the need for more cross-party and to push this over the line, and that normally requires for appreciation on both sides. Is that something that you do proactively look to do? Because I know otherwise it can come a bit tit for tat, and you know, oh, so and so said this, so and so took money from them, they took money from developers, oh, and so did they. Because let's face it, I think every party has at some point. You know, it's how do you think that gets managed in making sure that those party political points, as it were, don't overtake the need and the immediate need for this to actually progress as jointly as possible?
Let me try and answer that diplomatically. I think backbenchers across the House want to find a solution. I think this is an unusual government, frankly, and I think that creates a problem. So I'd like to be as optimistic as you are that it can be done cross-party, but you know, in the end, he's going to require. I mean, this government's got a big majority, so it really has got to be sorted out there. And I know Robert Jenrick quite well, and you know, I don't personally think that some of the public sort of stereotyping of Robert is entirely fair. He's a political opponent of mine, but I think he probably wants to sort this out too. I think whoever was doing it would face the same problem, which is that, and referring back to Sam's point earlier, about this sort of long chains of, I was going to say, irresponsibility. So many of these people are gone. Well, they haven't necessarily gone, but the structures they were part of have disappeared. So trying to track it back to the people who really made a killing out of this kind of stuff is really, really hard. And so part of the answer has been looking possibly not entirely fairly, but to try and capture some of the value from future developments. I mean, in a way, that's just penalising the young generation yet again, which I think is a big problem in general. But in the end, this is a societal problem. Who is going to pay for those mistakes of the past? Probably in the end, it is going to be everybody to some extent. But that, there is no simple solution to that, I'm afraid. So sorry, that's not really a very hopeful or helpful answer. But these are big sums of money, and I suppose all I would say is, if you're talking about £15 billion, you could build an awful lot of council homes with £15 billion, and there's an awful lot of people who need decent, affordable, high-quality accommodation in this country. And I'm not entirely sure I want all that 15 billion to be spent on compensating another sector of society, when there's a equally deserving, and in my case, I would argue, more deserving in some cases, set of people who have been completely left out of the debate. So it's hard. In the end, political choices.
Yes, very hard. Katie Thornburrow, would you like to come in? Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's so, well, depressing really hearing the residents' stories, because people are so powerless. There's no proper ombudsman. You're not getting responses, and it doesn't feel like justice. As I think one of the speakers said earlier, you get more protection when you buy a toaster than you do when you sink most of your worldly goods and a massive mortgage into a house. And I mean, it worries me as well with these new zoning plans that this is not going to get better, and nor is the lack of, I think the first speaker was talking about the lack of skilled tradespeople. That's not going to improve at the moment. We know we've lost a lot through Brexit already. So I suppose anything Daniel and colleagues can do to get this up the national agenda. I mean, I agree with you. I think it is cross-party concerns. You can see that obviously in recent by-elections, Chesham and Amersham, things like planning and these kind of lack of democratic accountability. But also I think after things are built, people are understanding that it's frustrating, because often now it's people's children who are experiencing that, which I think is pushing up the political agenda, but obviously not far enough. And I've been following new issues with doubling ground rents and things for quite a few years. It's had quite a lot of coverage in various papers, and it's just wrong. So I can't put it any more succinctly than that. So I think anything we can do, but as Tumi said, it needs national pressure as well. Councils can do so much, but not having the building control where we can go in and check, and as pointed out earlier, so many builders are for some reason having houses signed off that perhaps wouldn't go through our building control. So yeah, anything we can do nationally to push that, I think cross-party would be very, very welcome. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katie. Sam, are you still on here? Do you want to come in at all?
No, I think I've said my piece, actually. It is tremendously depressing, both for obviously for the individuals caught up in the middle of it, but I think also as someone who has got involved in politics in order to make a difference, to feel like your hands are more or less completely tied is really very, disillusioning. So very motivated to try to find a way of tackling it.
Katie, could I try and inject a slight note of optimism, because I wouldn't want people to think that this is the only way it can be, that there's nothing that can be done. Things will change. Politics is like that. Governments will change, and what we've got to learn from all this is, I hope that everybody right across the political spectrum can learn that deregulation may have its place sometimes, but there's also a reason for having rules and structures. And annoying though they can be, and that we all find them annoying, actually I think because I'm quite prepared to admit this. In my view, the last Labour government was too tempted by deregulation as well. I have to say, under pressure from many people who told us that's what needed to be done. I think what we've learned from all this is that unfortunately, if you don't have proper rules and structures, and local council, and I still think local councils are trusted by the populace, and I don't think they have to be, I don't think the only criteria is can you do it cheapest and in the most efficient way. I think there's another set of values which are important. I think re-establishing that broad consensus that there is a reason for having rules and making sure they're enforced, because that's the other thing I would say. Parliament's very good at passing law, dreadful at then making sure that the resources to make sure that they're abided by, which can then all too quickly lead to a situation whereby the only people who do abide by it are law-abiding people, and people are taken for a ride. So there's got to be follow through from passing the legislation. But even this week, with this not very satisfactory debate on this, I do detect that there is some progress. So I think what the effort's got to go into now is trying to undo this very complicated regulatory tangle, whereby you've got things like the RICS advice, you've got the EWS 1 forms, you've got the insurance, you've got this sort of massive growth industry of assessors, and the insurance companies and the mortgage lenders. Actually, I think one can discern there is a real effort going in to try and undo some of that stuff, and that should begin to unlock some of it. That's the optimist in me. That's what parliamentarians can support and help. It does need leadership from government. I genuinely think they probably want to find a way out. Why wouldn't you? Because clearly this is not doing the government any good at the moment. So let's try and find, and if we could, if there are examples where one can see that there's a particular problem with a particular mortgage lender or a particular estate manager still kind of hiding behind to some extent, although I think some of them have tried quite hard, hiding behind these excuses that they've got to do it because, let's highlight that. I'll do whatever I can. Please pass me examples. I'll keep passing them on, and hopefully we can begin to find a way out of this horrible maze, because it started with Grenfell, but it's now led to all these other things unforeseen, which are and obviously the safety stuff's got to be dealt with. It's all the other things that have followed which have made it so complicated and difficult. So let's find a solution.
Yes, I do find that some examples, like Paul Colbert has formed an action group, and I think Alex Dickin from Ipswich CAG was explaining the advantages of collective voice. I think as a local councillor, rather than being contacted many times by individuals, I think a group voice does help me. But I also know, Daniel, that sometimes there's so little that any ward councillor can do. We're trying and trying, that the groups then go to you. And I sometimes feel that we could do more to assist residents before they go to you. And I do wonder whether the insurance industry and what's happening with that, and that may actually help change things as well, because there could be a point where some of the developers, the consultants, those in the industry may not be able to get insurance for new projects going on because of what's recognised with the current problems within the industry, and that might change it. So, Martin, would you like to make a comment or ask something?
I do have an ask, yes, and it is something which councillors may be able to act on rather than Parliament, and that is that there are divided opinions on this amongst lawyers and councillors and others, but it may be possible for councillors to use planning conditions to ban fleasehold and to ban the estate management practices where leaseholders do not have the right to manage despite its presence in legislation. And so I would ask you all, please consider using planning conditions to forbid any estate where freeholders and leaseholders do not, within 2 or 3 years, have the ability to appoint new managing agents. That's something I think that is arguably within the powers of the planning authority, and it doesn't do anything about build quality, but it may help us constrain the growth of the problems with managing agents. And you may be able to use Grampian conditions to get it retrospectively changed for nearby places. I see some people shaking their heads, but I've heard both sides of this argument, and I'm not persuaded that it is impossible.
Martin, thank you. I know we get asked about other, trying to use planning conditions for many things. I think if it, Tumi and I, we'll look into it. Well, I'll look into it again. I'll talk to Tumi and we'll see if that's something. Because the other thing is, the suggestion about post-occupancy inspections, I would really like that to be part of the planning condition, because a home is not the bricks and mortars; it's the success of the space as a home. Tumi. And then maybe Daniel would like to wrap up this session.
I mean, I have asked, about conditions being used for a number of things, including, stuff like that. And I mean, I don't like this private roads that is tending to be built nowadays. And I did ask the question at the time, I've got one in my village that's giving me a lot of problems. Any new developments, please don't build private roads. But that's what seems to be accepted now. We can't use a planning condition to prevent it. That's the issue. We can't at this point in time. But there's no, we can look at what is possible to do. But I must say this, there's only so much that the planning department can do. We're already struggling with what we are supposed to do now. And there's going to have to be resourcing. I mean, this is a nationwide problem. Daniel, I'm sure you're aware of that. There's a nationwide problem with finding qualified planners. There's a dearth of planners in the country. We have to revise that if we're going to make a stride in dealing with the proposal in the white paper that we had last year, but they're now talking about now. All the things that they want planning departments to do will need to be resourced, and right now we are under-resourced. So that's going to be an issue. But we are, we're happy to look at what we can do, as long as we will be able to do it and not just take it on and then do it badly. I wouldn't want to do that.
Thank you, Tumi.
Well, thanks, Katie. I mean, I think all the points have been very well made this morning. I mean, this is not a simple set of issues, it has to be said. I'd like to continue being optimistic and say that the planning legislation that's being brought forward might address some of these things. Like many people, I was not enthused by the planning white paper last year. I think some real risks attached to it. I think it's fair to say that there was quite a backlash from within the governing party's own backbenches. And I think they would be sensible to be thinking about that. No one's saying the planning system is perfect, but I still believe passionately that our environment and our living space and our quality of life is improved by a plan-led system. And within that, there's lots of rooms for tweaking and improvement. But actually, Tumi's point about you've got to have the planners to do it, and you've got to have local authorities with the resources to do it, he's absolutely right. So yeah, well, thank you all of you. You've given me, as ever, lots more to go away and think about. Lots more problems, a few hints of solutions. None of this is easy, but I suppose my parting thought would be very much still with the people who are stuck with the problem at the moment. And I think we've got a real obligation as representatives to try and find ways of helping them with that. Because I was talking to people last week in Trumpington who are doctors who are struggling with the crisis in the NHS. The last thing they need when they come off shift is to come back and having to be joining calls like this to sort out a problem that they never envisaged walking into when they bought what a lot of them thought was a dream home. So we've got to do better. And I shall take your reflections back to Parliament. It's very good to see somebody I've not properly met. And it's been a very difficult year. I hope I have the opportunity to meet you. Sometimes it's been more than a few years, isn't it? In the flesh sometime. And thank you for all that you do. And thank you for the constructive tone.
Thank you very much. We're going to have half an hour break. We've been here all morning, and I so appreciate the councillors and the experts and the residents. Thank you so much.